wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, something already feels used. Not tired, used. You lie there a few seconds longer than you meant to, not because you can't move, but because moving would require choosing. Which side of the bed, which thought to follow first, whether to check your phone, whether to ignore it. It's small, almost invisible, and yet your body reacts as if something larger is at stake. You tell yourself it's nothing. Everyone makes decisions all day. This is normal. It is normal, but normal doesn't mean neutral. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from effort. It comes from accumulation. You don't notice it building. You just notice the weight, the outfit, the breakfast, the reply you haven't sent, the calendar you haven't opened yet. None of these are heavy on their own, but your mind treats each one like a quiet evaluation, a small internal fork in the road, and every fork asks something subtle. What if you choose wrong? You may not consciously think that, but your nervous system often does. Decision-making isn't just selecting options, it's prediction. Your brain tries to simulate outcomes, measure risk, anticipate reactions, even for things that barely matter, especially if you've trained it to scan for consequences. By the time the day officially begins, you've already run dozens of silent simulations. You call it mourning. Your body calls it cognitive load. And that load doesn't announce itself. It just drains you quietly. There's a reason small decisions feel heavier than they logically should. But it's not about weakness, and it's not about laziness. It might not be what you think it is. It doesn't feel dramatic. There's no crisis, no visible pressure, just a low, steady hum of having to decide. And what makes it heavier isn't the size of the choices, it's the frequency. Every decision, even trivial ones, requires inhibition. To choose one thing, your brain has to suppress the others, suppress the alternative outfit, the alternative response, the alternative plan for the day. That suppression isn't free, not emotional energy, regulatory energy. And your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, weighing, filtering, doesn't fully wake up just because your eyes do. It ramps up gradually, which means the earliest decisions often feel disproportionately effortful. You notice it as hesitation, or irritability, or that strange resistance to beginning anything at all. It's easy to misinterpret that resistance as avoidance. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's simply depletion happening earlier than you expected. There's another layer beneath that. If you grew used to monitoring outcomes, adjusting yourself to prevent conflict, to avoid mistakes, to anticipate others, your brain may treat even minor choices as socially loaded. What looks like, what should I wear, quietly carries, how will this be received? What looks like, when should I reply, quietly carries, what will this mean? The decision itself is small. The predicted consequence is not. So the brain works harder, not because you are fragile, but because it has learned that small moves can ripple. And once a system learns that, it rarely relaxes on its own. There's still something deeper here, because not everyone experiences mornings this way. You might tell yourself you just need better discipline, or fewer options, or a stricter routine, and those things can reduce friction, but they don't fully explain the weight, because the exhaustion often begins before the first real demand. It begins in anticipation. There's a quiet scanning that happens the moment consciousness returns, a subtle inventory. What needs to be handled? Who might need something? What could go wrong? What you might forget? It moves quickly, so quickly you rarely notice it as thought. You only feel the after effect. This kind of scanning usually develops for a reason. At some point, being prepared mattered. Catching small shifts in tone mattered, choosing carefully reduced consequences, so your nervous system learned to stay ahead. The problem is, anticipation doesn't distinguish between a real threat and a possible inconvenience. It treats uncertainty itself as something to manage, and decisions are condensed uncertainty. Every small choice carries a moment of not knowing. For someone whose system is tuned to reduce unpredictability, that moment stretches. It becomes effort, not dramatic effort, just constant micro-adjustments, like holding your posture slightly tense all day without realizing it. It may not be the deciding that's wearing you down. You're exhausted from monitoring. and monitoring rarely feels urgent enough to justify rest. There's still one more piece, because even when the day is objectively simple, the fatigue can remain. Even on days when nothing important is scheduled, the heaviness can still be there. That's usually the confusing part. If there's no pressure, no real stakes, why does choosing breakfast feel like a negotiation? Because the fatigue isn't coming from the day itself. It's coming from self-management. There's a subtle habit of adjusting, measuring what version of you is required, productive enough, responsive enough, careful enough, efficient enough. Before the day starts, you're already calibrating, and calibration is quiet work. It asks, how much energy can I spend? How visible should I be? What can I postpone without consequence? You don't consciously sit down and calculate this, but your mind does. And when your sense of safety has historically depended on getting it right, even in small ways, the calibration tightens. Small decisions stop being neutral. They become signals about adequacy. That's why they feel heavier in the morning. Your system hasn't yet gathered evidence that the day is safe, so it prepares for evaluation. The exhaustion isn't a flaw in motivation. It may be your system trying to stay ahead of something, and protection is expensive. But there's a shift that can happen, not through force, not through stricter control, that changes how these mornings feel. It doesn't remove decisions. It changes your relationship to them. There's a quiet difference between choosing and proving. Most mornings, it doesn't feel like you're just deciding what to wear or when to respond. It feels like you're establishing something. Competence, responsibility, stability. As if the first few decisions of the day set a tone you'll be judged by, even if no one is watching. That pressure is rarely conscious. It's older than the moment. When your system has learned that small missteps lead to disproportionate reactions, disappointment, criticism, withdrawal, it starts treating every choice as meaningful. Not logically meaningful, emotionally meaningful. And emotion is what consumes energy. Your brain can handle dozens of neutral decisions. What drains it is significance. When every small action feels like it might confirm something about you, the day begins with evaluation, and evaluation is tiring. This is why simplifying your schedule sometimes doesn't help, because the exhaustion was never about the number of decisions. It may have had more to do with what those decisions seem to represent. If you begin to notice that, without rushing to correct it, something shifts. Not dramatically, just a small separation. A moment where choosing breakfast is only about breakfast, where sending a message is only about information, where the morning does not carry the weight of your worth. That separation takes time. It isn't forced. It grows through small experiences of neutrality, decisions that do not lead to consequence. And when your nervous system slowly gathers that evidence, the mornings soften, not because the world changed, but because your system no longer has to prove safety before the day begins. If any of this feels familiar, it may not be about weakness. It may be about how carefully you've learned to move through the world. And careful people often don't realize how much energy they're spending just to begin. You're not broken for feeling tired before you start. You may simply be carrying more significance than the moment requires. And noticing that is already a quieter way of beginning.